I stared down at my worn navy flats, their leather softened by years of hospital corridors, as laughter rippled from across the table. "Those shoes are older than me," my daughter-in-law quipped, her words dipped in champagne and cruelty. My son didn't stop her. He laughed. After decades of raising him alone, after every bill I paid, every shift I worked, I realized the truth. They saw me as something to ridicule. So I stopped being silent and started rewriting their inheritance. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The restaurant gleamed with candlelight and polished brass, the kind of place that prided itself on turning every plate into a performance. Charleston's elite murmured over seared scallops and vintage wines, and every table seemed to hum with subtle competition. At the long table tucked beneath a chandelier, Elaine Porter sat in her dependable navy flats, the leather softened by years of walking hospital corridors. Vanessa Porter noticed them immediately. Her gaze slid down, pausing at the scuffed edges before curling into a smirk. She tilted her chin, let her manicured hand brush the stem of her glass, and raised her voice just enough to reach the servers gliding by. "Those shoes are older than me," she quipped, laughter riding her words like champagne bubbles. The table rippled with polite chuckles, none louder than Michael's, her son, the man Elaine had raised with careful hands and endless night shifts. His laugh was thin, nervous, not defending but not stopping his wife either. He leaned in as though to smooth things over, yet the damage had already landed. Elaine pressed her napkin against her lap, her fingers curling in the linen. She had walked miles in those flats, through sterile wards that smelled of antiseptic, and through grocery aisles where every coupon mattered. She said nothing. Silence was her armor, though the sting pressed sharp in her chest. Dinner resumed with tinkling forks and stories of business trips. Vanessa draped herself in anecdotes about boutiques in Atlanta, her heels crossing under the table like the legs of someone who believed the world was a runway. Every so often, her gaze flicked toward Elaine's shoes again, as though revisiting the joke. The food arrived, blackened grouper for Michael, roasted duck for Vanessa, and a modest plate of grilled salmon for Elaine. She savored the buttery citrus aroma, but each bite carried the metallic taste of humiliation. The conversation rolled on, everyone orbiting Vanessa's glow. Elaine caught Ruth Collins's eye from across the table. Ruth, sharp-eyed even at 72, tilted her head knowingly. Her red scarf brushed her shoulder as she whispered, "Don't rise to it." Then louder, in her trademark drawl, "Good salmon tonight, Elaine." Elaine nodded, forcing a smile. She chewed carefully, the sound of Vanessa's laughter pricking her ears like the scrape of utensils on porcelain. By dessert, Vanessa was showing her phone around, photographs of her newest heels, glossy leather with soles still untouched by the pavement. "Real Italian," she said proudly, glancing once more at Elaine's feet as if to underscore the difference. Elaine folded her hands. She had given too many years to working for stability, not sparkle. But the insult lodged in her ribs, more stubborn than any shift she had endured at the hospital. When the check came, Michael thanked Elaine softly for helping with the bills this month, as though she hadn't already overheard his whispered conversations with Vanessa about overspending. Vanessa only lifted her chin higher, her lip gloss catching the light as though triumph itself shone there. Later that evening, after polite goodbyes in the parking lot filled with shining cars, Ruth walked beside Elaine under the damp Charleston air. Magnolia blooms carried a heavy sweetness, the kind that lingered on clothes. Ruth nudged her elbow gently. "She kicked the wrong woman tonight," Ruth said. Her eyes glinted, not with sympathy but with the kind of fire that dared Elaine to fight back. At home, the house was quiet but not cold. Photographs lined the mantel, Michael as a boy with a missing tooth, a family trip to Folly Beach, her late husband's smile on a summer porch. Elaine moved through the rooms without turning on lights, guided by memory. Her steps slowed before the cedar chest in her bedroom, the one that smelled faintly of polished wood and lavender sachets. She knelt, joints stiff, and lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of papers she hadn't touched in years, her will, deeds, and the careful documentation of every hour, every dollar, every sacrifice. Her fingers hovered over them. The humiliation from dinner still clung like smoke in her lungs, but here, with the proof of a lifetime's labor before her, another feeling bloomed: resolve. Vanessa had laughed at old shoes, but those shoes had carried Elaine through a life of earning, of saving, of building something too valuable to be mocked. Elaine set the papers on her bed, the air heavier now, the night alive with a decision only she could make. The stack of papers lay across Elaine's quilt, like a map of her life: deeds, savings accounts, insurance policies, and her neatly typed will. The lamp's yellow glow caught the edges of each page, making them look more brittle than they were. Her hand lingered over the signature at the bottom. The black ink faded but steady. Michael Porter and Vanessa Porter, joint heirs to everything she had spent a lifetime building. She breathed out slowly, her chest tight. The cedar chest still carried the faint bite of cedar oil, a scent that always reminded her of putting things away for safekeeping. These papers weren't just documents. They were the hours of double shifts at the hospital, the quiet meals of soup and crackers when she couldn't afford more, and the mortgage checks she'd mailed one by one until the house was finally hers. Every sacrifice had been pressed into these lines. Her gaze drifted to the photograph on the dresser, Michael as a boy, holding a fishing rod beside his father. His grin had been wide, his knees dirty. Vanessa wasn't in that memory. Vanessa never would be. Yet here on the page, she was written in bold letters, claiming a future she had never helped earn. A knock at the door startled her, but it was only Ruth, letting herself in with the spare key. She stepped inside with a paper bag in hand, the smell of fried chicken rising from it. "Thought you might need something more than toast tonight," Ruth said, settling the bag on the counter. Elaine didn't answer right away. She simply turned the will toward her friend. The pages rustled faintly, the sound too loud in the quiet room. Ruth's eyes scanned the lines, and a slow frown tugged her mouth. "Joint heirs," she said, her voice carrying both disbelief and disgust. "Don't let her strut in shoes she didn't buy." Elaine pressed her lips together. She could still hear Vanessa's mocking tone from the restaurant, every syllable sharpened like glass. "She thinks everything is a joke," Elaine murmured. "And Michael, he just sits there." Ruth eased herself into the chair opposite her, scarf slipping slightly down her shoulder. "Michael's weak. Always has been. But weakness isn't evil. Vanessa?" She tapped the page with a pointed finger. "That's entitlement with claws." The words landed heavy, but they gave Elaine something to grip. Entitlement with claws. That was exactly what Vanessa had become in their lives. She picked up her pen, turning it in her fingers. It was heavier than she remembered, the kind of weight that could change futures with a single stroke. "Maybe it's time I stop rewarding silence," she said quietly. Ruth leaned back, a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. "Now you're talking." The decision began to harden inside her. She set aside the will and reached for her small leather planner, its pages filled with tidy appointments and grocery lists. On a fresh sheet, she wrote the name Daniel Price, her estate attorney, calm, precise, and trusted for years. Tomorrow she would schedule an appointment. The clock ticked on the mantel, steady and sure, as though keeping time with her new resolve. Later that evening Michael called. His voice was soft, strained around the edges. "Mom, thanks again for helping with the bills this month. Vanessa's just been stressed. That's all. You know how she gets." Elaine listened without interrupting. The way he said helping with the bills as though she were a safety net he could always fall back on, made her stomach tighten. She pictured Vanessa's glittering heels against her worn flats, the sound of laughter still ringing in her ears. When the call ended, she didn't answer the silence with tears. Instead, she opened her notebook again, drew the pen to the page and wrote slowly, deliberately: "Remove Vanessa first." The office smelled faintly of leather-bound books and polished mahogany, the kind of place that carried its own gravity. Elaine sat across from Daniel Price, her hands folded in her lap, the faint tremor of anticipation hidden by her steady gaze. He was a man who dealt in details. his wire-frame glasses perched low on his nose, his desk neatly arranged, not a pen out of place. Daniel leaned back, studying her with quiet patience. "It's been a while since we met about your estate. What brings you in today, Elaine?" Her throat tightened as she pictured Vanessa's smirk at the restaurant, the laughter that had cut deeper than it should have. Elaine steadied herself with a slow breath. "Humiliation," she said simply. In clarity, "I've decided I don't want my daughter-in-law to inherit a single cent of what I worked for." His brows lifted slightly, though his expression remained calm. "You want to cut her out completely?" Elaine met his gaze, her voice sharp as the snap of a thread. "Not just her. I want her begging. I want her to know she laughed at the wrong woman." For a moment the room seemed to still. Outside, a gull cried, the faint sound drifting from the harbor, but inside only the ticking of Daniel's clock filled the silence. Finally he nodded. "Then we'll restructure everything. A trust is cleaner than a will in cases like this. It allows you to bypass her entirely, while still providing for Michael under conditions you control. Vanessa won't see a dime, not unless you allow it." Elaine felt a small fierce satisfaction rise inside her. The pen he placed in her hand felt heavier than it should have, weighted with decades of work, every overtime shift, every dollar she had scraped together. "Walk her right out of it," Ruth said from her chair in the corner. She had insisted on coming along, claiming she had nothing better to do, though Elaine knew it was loyalty more than boredom. Ruth's smile was sharp, almost mischievous. "Let her strut in those heels, knowing they won't take her far." Elaine pressed her signature onto the first draft, her handwriting still strong, the ink bleeding slightly into the thick paper. Each stroke felt like a step taken on a new path, one away from humiliation and toward dignity reclaimed. Daniel gathered the signed pages, stacking them with precise care. He reached for another folder, flipping through documents with the quiet rhythm of someone who lived inside fine print. Then his hand paused. His eyes narrowed behind his glasses. "That's odd," he murmured. Elaine straightened, a flicker of unease darting through her. "What is it?" He pulled out a document from the stack, an unfamiliar loan agreement, crisp but tucked among her estate files. His finger traced the signature line. "This is Michael's name." But he turned it toward Elaine, the penmanship glaringly different. "This doesn't match his signature on file." "Not even close." Ruth leaned forward, squinting. "That's Vanessa's handwriting. I'd bet my last nickel on it." Daniel's voice dropped, deliberate. "If this is what it looks like, Elaine, it's forgery. A loan fraudulently taken out in your son's name." Elaine's breath caught, her fingers curling against the armrest of the chair. Shame for her son's blind loyalty and fury for Vanessa's arrogance collided in her chest. Daniel set the paper down with finality, his tone now edged with steel. "This changes things. We're not just talking about inheritance anymore. This could be criminal." The room seemed to shrink around them, the air dense, charged. Elaine's humiliation had already sparked resolve, but this discovery set fire to something far larger. Vanessa hadn't just mocked her shoes, she had stepped straight into felony. Daniel spread the papers across his desk, each sheet laid out like evidence on a courtroom table. The fluorescent light above hummed faintly, catching the ridges of the embossed letterhead. Elaine's eyes moved over the loan document, her stomach tightening with every line. The borrowed amount wasn't small. It was the kind of sum that could choke a family if the payments slipped. And the signature, though written with confidence, was not Michael's. She'd watched her son sign birthday cards, report cards, even her hospital discharge papers when she was sick years ago. His letters curved softly. This hand was sharp, rushed as though mimicking him in costume. Elaine swallowed hard. "I'm stunned," she said, her voice low, but not surprised. The words left her mouth like stones, heavy with years of watching Vanessa circle Michael like a hawk circling a rabbit. From her seat in the corner, Ruth let out a dry laugh. "That woman's heels are too shiny to be clean. Nobody struts around like that without hiding something slippery." She shook her head, the fringe of her scarf swinging. Daniel adjusted his glasses, his tone turning deliberate. "Forgery is criminal. And this he tapped the page with his pen, the click echoing in the quiet room. This could open doors we didn't expect. Elaine, this isn't just leverage for estate planning. This is a legal weapon. The word weapon settled in Elaine's chest, not cruelly, but with a sense of justice. Vanessa hadn't just insulted her shoes at dinner. She had carved her greed into paper and sealed it with Michael's name. Elaine leaned forward, her hands steady now. What do we need to do? Daniel slid a legal pad toward her. Gather anything you can. Bank statements, credit notices, even casual remarks she might have made. Don't confront her yet. The less she knows we're aware, the cleaner this will go in court. Ruth's eyes gleamed. Like catching a rat in a kitchen, quiet steps, no sudden noise. Elaine nodded. The image fit. She thought of her home, the cedar chest, the smell of old lavender, and the files she'd kept all these years. Now they would serve her in a way she had never imagined. The days that followed became a quiet mission. Elaine moved through her house methodically, sorting through file drawers and bank envelopes, the smell of old paper clinging to her hands. She found statements with odd charges, credit accounts she hadn't realized existed, balances that climbed higher than Michael's income could explain. Each page felt like peeling back a layer of Vanessa's polish, revealing rot underneath. Meanwhile, Vanessa was anything but discreet. Her social media gleamed with photos, her legs crossed at rooftop bars, her feet slipped into new designer heels, the captions dripping with hashtags about luxury living and hard work pays off. Elaine scrolled through them one evening, her lips pressed into a thin line. Hard work. The words rang like mockery when Elaine thought of the 12-hour night shifts she had worked for decades. She printed the photos, sliding them into a folder alongside the financial statements. Every detail mattered now: the sheen of Vanessa's new shoes, the cocktail glasses in her manicured hands, the timestamps showing how fast she spent what she hadn't earned. When Elaine returned to Daniel's office, the folder was thick, her steps lighter despite the weight she carried. She laid the evidence on his desk without a word. Daniel flipped through it slowly, his expression unreadable, until he closed the folder with a decisive snap. "This is enough," he said. "More than enough. I'll prepare a formal legal complaint." Elaine exhaled, the sound sharp in the still air. Outside, Charleston's streets buzzed faintly with evening traffic. But inside the office, a different kind of storm was gathering. Ruth leaned closer, her grin quick and fierce. "Well," she murmured, "Vanessa just scuffed her last floor." Daniel slid the complaint form into the center of his desk, uncapping his pen. "Now we begin." The complaint was only a few pages long, but when Daniel slid it across his desk for Elaine's signature, it felt like a stone dropped into still water, the kind that would ripple outward, unstoppable. The legal language was dense, yet the accusation blazed clear in black ink: forgery, fraudulent loan, criminal intent. Elaine held the pen steady, her pulse ticking loud in her ears. She signed without hesitation. That same afternoon, Daniel began filing the paperwork. His paralegal moved briskly, the sound of the copy machine spitting out duplicates filling the air, the smell of toner sharp. It was official now. What Vanessa had scribbled in arrogance was about to be dragged into the unforgiving light of the court system. Michael was the first to react, blindsided when Daniel called him in to explain the complaint. He sat stiff in the office chair, tie loose at the collar, his jaw shifting as if he were chewing on words he couldn't swallow. "You think Vanessa would do this?" he asked, voice brittle. Elaine studied him, her silence longer than he could stand. Finally she said, calm but cutting, "I don't think, Michael. I know, in your silence, your refusal to stand up to her costs you." He flinched, eyes darting away, but he didn't argue. Not really. His defense was half-hearted at best, muttered lines about stress, misunderstandings, and how Vanessa wouldn't risk something so reckless. But his voice wavered, and even he seemed unconvinced. 2 days later, the official notice landed in Vanessa's mailbox. The letterhead from the Charleston County Court carried a weight she couldn't laugh away. She tore it open at the kitchen counter, her acrylic nails clicking against the paper. Michael watched her face drain, as she read, her lips parting in a gasp sharp enough to slice the air. "What is this?" she hissed, waving the document at him. "Forgery? Investigation? This is your mother trying to ruin us." Michael didn't answer right away. His shoulders slumped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you sign my name, Vanessa?" The silence that followed told him everything. Across town, Ruth arrived at Elaine's with fresh peaches from the market. She plopped them on the counter and grinned when Elaine told her about the notice. "The shoe's on the other foot now," Ruth said, slicing into one of the peaches with a pocket knife. The juice ran sweet and sticky, dripping onto her napkin, and she won't be strutting far in it. That evening, Daniel returned with a new folder, this one thicker, heavier, the amended trust documents inside. Elaine leafed through the crisp pages. The adjustments were precise. Michael listed as conditional heir, Vanessa removed entirely, charitable beneficiaries inserted with airtight language to prevent contest. Every paragraph read like justice stitched into law. Elaine signed again, her name flowing firm and unapologetic. When the pen left the page, Daniel gave her a brief, satisfied nod. But the true blow came swiftly after. The judge overseeing the complaint reviewed the financial evidence and issued an emergency order. Michael and Vanessa's joint accounts were frozen pending investigation. When the news reached them, Vanessa's scream rattled the windows of their Charleston home. For the first time, she wasn't laughing at anyone's shoes. She was staring at her own reflection, heels useless, stride broken mid-step. The boutique hummed with soft jazz and the faint perfume of leather handbags. Vanessa moved through the aisles as if she owned them, her heels tapping a polished rhythm on the floor. She ran her hand across a rack of silk dresses, the fabric slipping between her fingers like water. A sales associate hovered nearby, eager to please, arms loaded with Vanessa's chosen items, shoes in glossy patent leather, a clutch that sparkled under the track lights, a blazer tagged with a price higher than Elaine's monthly pension. Vanessa approached the register with the air of a queen claiming tribute. She slid her platinum card across the counter, smiling at her reflection in the mirrored display. The machine beeped once, then twice. The cashier's polite expression faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am, it's been declined." Vanessa blinked, her smile freezing. "Run it again." The card was swiped. Declined. A second card also declined. The cashier's cheeks flushed pink, her voice carefully neutral. "Perhaps you'd like to call your bank." Heads turned from nearby shoppers. Vanessa felt the sting of eyes on her back, whispers rustling like dry leaves. Her face burned as she snapped her clutch shut, heels clicking harder now, not with power, but with panic. Across town, Michael faced humiliation of his own. He sat at the banker's desk, paperwork spread before him. The banker's tone was clipped but polite. "Mr. Porter, I'm afraid your accounts are frozen pending investigation. Until the matter is resolved, you won't have access to these funds." Michael rubbed his forehead, sweat beading despite the cool air conditioning. "I don't. This has to be a mistake. We have bills, mortgage, everything tied to these accounts. We can't just—" "I'm sorry, sir." The banker pushed the folder closer. The order came directly from the judge. Michael slumped back in his chair, staring at the floor. His tie hung loose, his voice carrying a tremor. "She's going to lose her mind." He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, Elaine sat at her kitchen table, the late afternoon light slanting gold across the wood. She sipped her tea slowly, its steam carrying the faint scent of chamomile. She hadn't needed to say a word. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't pleaded for dignity. She had simply placed her trust in Daniel. And now the results were rippling outward, reaching the ones who had mocked her. The phone buzzed. Daniel's voice came steady through the receiver. "The liens are secured, Elaine. Everything is locked down until the court finishes review. She can't touch a dollar." Elaine allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "That's enough for now." Beside her, Ruth sat peeling an orange, the citrus spray sharp in the air. She looked up, her eyes twinkling with wicked humor. "Every bill's a blister. And honey, she's about to blister all over." Elaine chuckled softly, setting her teacup down with care. The sound of Ruth's laughter filled the kitchen, warm and biting at once, but the quiet victory didn't last long. By evening, Elaine's phone buzzed again, this time with a notification. A video was spreading on social media. Vanessa, her face blotched red with fury, stood outside a boutique, shouting into her phone. "This is Elaine Porter's doing. My so-called mother-in-law is trying to ruin us. She's jealous, bitter, she's destroying her own family." Elaine watched the clip twice, then set her phone down without a word. The storm she had unleashed was no longer confined to court papers and frozen accounts. Vanessa had chosen to fight in public, and Charleston loved a scandal. The courtroom was colder than Vanessa expected, its air conditioning humming against the humidity pressing down on Charleston outside. She stood at the defendant's table in a fitted cream blazer, her heels clicking nervously against the tile whenever she shifted. The scent of polished oak benches and old paper filled the space, heavy with the weight of decisions made there every day. Judge Harlan Green presided with a stern face carved from stone. His gavel rested untouched, but his presence alone silenced the room. Daniel Price, calm as ever, shuffled his neatly organized stack of documents, every movement deliberate. Elaine sat directly behind him, her navy flats planted firmly on the floor. She wasn't there to gloat, her stillness, her dignity was louder than anything Vanessa could conjure. When Daniel rose, his voice cut across the courtroom like a measured blade. "Your Honor, the complaint outlines a fraudulent loan signed in the name of Michael Porter. My client's daughter-in-law, Mrs. Vanessa Porter, authored this forgery. The evidence is here: signature comparisons, bank statements, and digital traces linking her to the account." He laid the pages before the bailiff, each document sliding into the judge's hands. Vanessa's throat tightened as Judge Green adjusted his glasses and scanned the papers. The shuffle of sheets was deafening to her ears. She shifted again, her perfume, jasmine, and something sharper filling her own nostrils, suddenly cloying. When it was her turn, she rose too quickly, her chair scraping loud against the floor. This is ridiculous. I didn't forge anything. Michael knew about the loan. We agreed on it, didn't we, Michael? Her eyes darted desperately toward her husband. Michael sat at the edge of his seat, hands clasped, head lowered. The weight of the room pressed on him until his silence was damning. His throat worked as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Judge Green's eyebrows lifted. "Mr. Porter, did you authorize this loan?" Michael's voice cracked. "No, Your Honor, I didn't." The admission landed like a hammer. Vanessa's face drained, her lips parting. She tried to recover, stumbling into another excuse. I must have misunderstood. I thought it was what we needed. I thought." The judge leaned forward, unimpressed. His voice was slow, deliberate. "Mrs. Porter, misunderstandings do not explain a forged signature. The evidence presented is compelling." Behind Daniel, Elaine finally spoke, her tone quiet but clear enough to reach the judge's bench. "Shoes wear out. Character shows through." Vanessa whipped her head toward her mother-in-law, fury in her eyes, but she was met with nothing more than Elaine's steady gaze. No gloating, no smirk, just the kind of silence that revealed everything. Daniel pressed on, his arguments lined with precision. He detailed the paper trail, the unusual spending patterns, the sudden influx of designer purchases aligning with the loan's disbursement. Each point pinned Vanessa further, stripping away the sheen she wore like armor. The courtroom murmured when Daniel held up printed screenshots of Vanessa's social media posts. New shoes, champagne, handbags, all posted within days of the loan. He set them down beside the forged document, like puzzle pieces snapping into place. Judge Green tapped the edge of his bench with a finger, his expression firm. "This court will not overlook fraudulent behavior. Mrs. Porter, your excuses hold no weight here." The silence that followed was suffocating. The buzz of the fluorescent lights above seemed louder than any human sound. Then the judge straightened, his next words cutting deeper than anyone anticipated. "Given the evidence of forged signatures and the financial strain placed on Mr. Porter's accounts, this court is expanding the case. We will also examine potential financial exploitation." A ripple of surprise ran through the room. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table, her nails clicking against the wood. Daniel allowed himself the faintest satisfied nod, while Ruth, seated behind Elaine, whispered with relish, "Well, that's the nail in her coffin." Elaine didn't smile, but her heart tightened with the weight of justice pressing forward. The humiliation she'd once swallowed at a dinner table had now bloomed into this moment, a court, a judge, and Vanessa cornered by her own greed. And this was only the beginning. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Green shuffled the final set of papers. His gavel had not yet struck, but the weight of his coming words pressed down on every shoulder in the room. Vanessa stood rigid at the defendant's table, her manicured fingers worrying the edge of her blazer sleeve. Behind her composure, a tremor twitched through her hands. Judge Green's voice filled the chamber, low and unyielding. "The evidence presented confirms the use of a forged signature and the fraudulent acquisition of loan funds. Therefore, Mrs. Vanessa Porter is hereby ordered to repay the full sum of $126,000, plus accrued interest and legal fees." The number cracked through the air like thunder. A hush swept over the benches, followed quickly by murmurs. Ruth leaned forward, her scarf brushing against Elaine's shoulder as she whispered, "That's one expensive laugh." Vanessa's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the table tighter, her knuckles paling. The sum wasn't abstract. It was the entire foundation of her carefully built facade. The handbags, the shoes, the weekends away, all bought on a lie, now dragging her into a pit she couldn't strut out of. Michael's head sank lower. He rubbed his temples as though the weight of the judgment was pressing into his skull. Slowly, his gaze lifted toward Vanessa, but what he saw wasn't a victim. It was a woman cornered by her own deceit. The realization hollowed his face. His voice hoarse, barely carried, "You did this. You actually did this." Vanessa turned sharply, her voice breaking under the strain. "Michael, I did it for us. You think your paycheck covers the life we deserve? I was just enough." His interruption landed sharper than she expected. He leaned away from her, as if the very nearness of her words carried poison. Elaine didn't flinch. She sat upright in the gallery, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her flats were worn at the edges, but they were planted steady, unashamed. Watching Vanessa unravel was not triumph in her eyes. It was inevitability. Years of arrogance, years of silence she had tolerated, all converging into this courtroom moment. Daniel rose once more, submitting the final tally of damages. His words were clinical, but the figures rolled like hammer strikes. Court fees, bank penalties, restitution. The number grew heavier with each addition until even the bailiff's eyes flicked upward at the staggering total. Vanessa tried to speak again, her voice trembling. "This is outrageous. I don't have that kind of money." Judge Green's gaze cut through her protest. "Perhaps you should have considered that before falsifying financial documents. The court will enforce repayment through wage garnishment, asset liquidation, or other legal remedies as necessary." Her lips quivered, but no words came. The hum of the ceiling fan above filled the silence she left behind, a steady drone that seemed to mock her sudden powerlessness. From the back, Ruth sat with arms crossed, satisfaction flickering across her face. She leaned toward Elaine again, whispering, "Every dollar she owes is a blister on those pretty little feet of hers." Elaine gave no reply, only the faintest curve of her mouth. Her victory wasn't in watching Vanessa suffer, it was in knowing that dignity, unlike wealth, couldn't be stolen. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Judge Green cleared his throat, stacking the documents into an orderly pile. "This matter is not yet concluded. Given the financial exploitation revealed here, the court will set a subsequent date for an estate review. All interested parties will be notified." The words dropped like fresh stones into an already rising tide. "Dim estate review." Vanessa's eyes widened, horror crawling across her face. Michael sat frozen, realizing that this wasn't only about loans anymore, this was about their future, their inheritance, the very fortune they had expected to lean on. Elaine, steady as ever, rose from her seat. The faint squeak of her shoes against the polished floor was the only sound she made, but it carried more weight than Vanessa's trembling pleas. The war was no longer confined to loans and lies. Now the fortune itself was on the line. The judge's order still echoed in Elaine's mind, as she sat once more in Daniel Price's office, the heavy curtains drawn against the Charleston sun, papers weighted neatly on his polished desk, a clean slate ready to hold her final intentions. She rested her palms on the leather armrest of the chair, breathing in the faint scent of ink and old books. This wasn't just about punishment anymore. It was about building something that would last longer than Vanessa's laughter. Daniel adjusted his glasses and slid the draft forward. Here's what we've drawn up. A conditional trust for Michael. He can access the funds only if he remains financially independent from Vanessa. And as for Vanessa herself, he tapped the page once, his tone sharpening. She receives nothing. Elaine's gaze drifted over the lines, her heart steady, her decision firm. Her laugh bought her nothing, she said quietly. The words felt final, like stitching the last seam of a garment she had been mending for years. Ruth, perched nearby with her scarf knotted loosely around her neck, let out a short, approving laugh. That's the kind of cut she won't recover from. Smart, clean, and well-deserved. But the changes didn't end there. Elaine's pen moved across the lines, naming her new heirs. Not Vanessa. Not even Michael directly. Instead, the Charleston Children's Hospital and a nursing scholarship fund for students who would carry on the work Elaine had once done in crowded hospital wards. She imagined their faces, the tired but determined students, the children in hospital beds who might one day smile because someone had given them a chance. Her fortune, built dollar by dollar, would breathe new life where it was truly needed. Daniel leaned back, studying her with approval. We've made it airtight. No contest clause, reinforced by the charitable designations. If anyone tries to challenge, they'll forfeit what little they might have gained. And the executor? Elaine asked. Daniel's lips curved faintly as he passed her the final page. You've chosen Ruth Collins. Loyal, sharp, and relentless. Frankly, I can't think of anyone better suited to guard your wishes. Ruth sat a little straighter, pride flickering in her eyes. Executor, she repeated, the word tasting sweet on her tongue. Well, that's a title I don't mind wearing. Elaine signed each page with careful strokes, the ink dark against the crisp white. Every signature closed a door on Vanessa's entitlement and opened another toward legacy. The weight in her chest lifted, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. But the moment of calm didn't last. A soft sound broke through the stillness, the creak of the outer office door. Daniel looked up, frowning, just as Michael appeared in the doorway. He hadn't been invited, but his face showed he hadn't come by accident. He must have overheard enough from the receptionist to piece things together. Mom? His voice cracked slightly. He took in the stack of documents, Ruth's smug expression, Daniel's composed demeanor. Realization dawned on him with visible weight. You're changing everything. Elaine didn't waver. She turned to meet her son's eyes, the boy she had once carried on her hip, now a man undone by silence. Yes, Michael, I am. Because I won't let her laugh at me and walk away with my life's work. He opened his mouth, closed it again, shame flickering across his face. He didn't argue. Not yet. He just backed out, quiet as though the walls of the office had pressed too tightly around him. Daniel cleared his throat softly, breaking the tension. He may not contest, but she will try to push him. Ruth gave a knowing hum, her scarf slipping as she leaned closer to Elaine. She'll sink her claws into him if she can. That woman doesn't know how to lose. That night, Michael sat alone in his car, Vanessa's calls lighting up his phone. When he finally answered, her voice came sharp, urgent, tinged with desperation. Michael, you can't let her do this. Contest it. Fight her. If you don't, she'll strip us of everything. Michael's silence on the other end was heavy. The battle Elaine had prepared for was far from over. Vanessa's manipulation was only just beginning. Vanessa sat across from Michael at their kitchen table, the faint smell of burnt coffee lingering between them. Her eyes shimmered. Though whether from real tears or well-practiced performance, it was hard to tell. The mascara hadn't smudged. She had dabbed carefully, just enough to look undone without being ruined. "Michael," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "I made a mistake. I got caught up in appearances. I just wanted us to have the life we deserved. I never meant to hurt you, or your mother." Her words floated in the stillness of the kitchen, soft as sugar, but Michael's expression didn't soften. His hands stayed locked together, knuckles pale, resting firmly against the table. The refrigerator hummed behind them, and somewhere outside, a dog barked. Everything ordinary felt louder than her apology. He stared at her, searching her face as if the truth might slip out from beneath the gloss. "You didn't just make a mistake, Vanessa. You signed my name. You lied to me, and now everyone sees it." Vanessa blinked rapidly, leaning closer. "I was desperate. Don't you see, if your mother had supported us more—" Michael cut her off with a sharp shake of his head. "Don't bring her into this. Not this time." The silence that followed was brittle. Vanessa's gaze darted away, her performance faltering for a heartbeat before she pulled the mask back on. "If we lose her inheritance, Michael will have nothing. We have to fight this. You have to convince her." But Michael didn't answer. He pushed back from the table and left the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall. Across town, Ruth was perched comfortably in Elaine's living room, legs crossed, scarf draped loosely. The scent of lemon polish lingered in the air from Elaine's morning cleaning spree. Ruth chuckled after Elaine recounted Vanessa's latest plea. "She's tripping on her own heels. A woman that practiced in vanity can't stumble this badly without trying to play the victim." Elaine didn't laugh. She simply lifted her teacup, the porcelain cool against her fingers. "She can cry to her closet," she said. Her tone was calm, but her words carried iron. Meanwhile, Daniel was tying the final bow on their strategy. At his office, he reviewed the filings one last time, his desk lamp casting shadows across neat stacks of documents. Every page was airtight, each clause unbreakable. By the time the sun dipped low over Charleston Harbor, the paperwork was submitted, unchallengeable and precise. The following morning, the courthouse buzzed faintly as Judge Green entered. His robe swished, the sharp scent of polished wood filling the room. He scanned the paperwork with the same stern patience as before. Then, with one firm stroke of his gavel, he finalized the restitution order. Vanessa would repay every cent, with interest under penalty of law. Vanessa's face crumpled, her heels clattering unevenly against the tile as she stumbled to sit down. For the first time, her composure slipped completely, and this ruling was only a shadow of what was still to come. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed off the paneled walls, sealing Vanessa's fate. Judge Green's voice carried no sympathy as he read his ruling. "In addition to the restitution previously ordered, Mrs. Porter will pay accrued interest, court fees and investigative costs. The total balance owed now exceeds $140,000. The figure landed like a thunderclap. Vanessa gripped the defense table so tightly her nails scraped against the wood. Michael's shoulders sagged beside her. His tie loosened, his face pale as paper. Even with his silence, the judgment fell squarely on both of them. Their fortune wasn't slipping away. It was collapsing in real time. Elaine sat in the gallery, hands folded neatly in her lap, the faintest scent of lavender clinging to her sweater. She didn't flinch, didn't smile. She simply absorbed the moment in silence, her eyes steady on Vanessa's trembling frame. By the time they reached home, Michael's phone buzzed constantly. Banks, creditors, financial advisors, all circling like vultures. Each call brought more strain. His savings accounts were drained by the freeze, his name tangled in his wife's deception. He sat at the dining room table, head in his hands, as Vanessa paced the kitchen, her heels clicking wildly against the hardwood. "This is impossible," she cried, flinging her handbag onto the counter. "They can't expect me to pay that much. I don't have it." Michael looked up, hollow-eyed. "Then start selling. Everything you bought with that money, you're returning it." Vanessa froze, disbelief washing across her face. "My shoes? My bags?" "Michael, those are mine. They were never yours. he said flatly. They were stolen. Sell them, Vanessa. Or they'll come for the house next. And so the purge began. One by one, the trophies of her vanity disappeared. The glossy red heels she'd once flaunted on social media were boxed and hauled to consignment shops. Designer coats vanished from her closet, leaving hangers rattling empty. Jewelry, handbags, sunglasses, all pawned or sold at a fraction of their price. Each item carried away stripped another piece of her identity, until the woman who had once strutted proudly into Charleston boutiques was now reduced to haggling quietly in second-hand stores. Elaine heard about it in pieces, whispers from neighbors, murmurs at church, the occasional sight of Vanessa ducking into pawn shops downtown. Ruth, of course, brought the news with relish. She leaned back in Elaine's kitchen chair, sipping sweet tea as though it were champagne. From Gucci to Goodwill, she said with a grin. I'd say that's a step down worth watching. Elaine only shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. There was no joy in watching someone unravel, even if that someone had mocked her so cruelly, but there was peace in knowing the unraveling was no longer hers to endure. At Daniel's office, the atmosphere was different, measured, controlled, final. He placed the last signed document into a folder and tapped it shut with calm satisfaction. Case closed, he told Elaine. The law will see this through. You won't need to lift a finger. She nodded, her relief quiet but real. She had walked this far, not with vengeance but with resolve. Now the system itself carried her burden forward. But just as Elaine thought the storm might settle, Charleston stirred. One morning, Ruth arrived with the newspaper tucked under her arm, the ink still fresh. She slapped it onto Elaine's kitchen table with a dramatic flair. The headline stretched bold across the front page, Charleston heir disinherited after fraud scandal. Elaine's eyes scanned the words, the weight of them sinking in. It was no longer a private war. It was public, printed for the entire city to see. And once Charleston caught the scent of scandal, there was no putting it back in the shadows. The headline spread like wildfire through Charleston, pasted across newsstands, whispered over coffee counters, shared in neighborhood groups online. By the time Vanessa stepped into the local grocery store, she could feel the eyes on her. Every aisle became a gauntlet. Someone whispered near the produce section, "That's her, the one who forged her husband's name." Another customer pretended to study apples, but snapped a photo when Vanessa turned. Her laugh, the sharp mocking sound that once dominated family dinners, was now twisted into the city's favorite cautionary tale. When she reached the register, the clerk gave a tight, forced smile and scanned her items in silence. The once adored image of Charleston society's trendsetter was crumbling, and no one was eager to stand in the rubble with her. Michael fared no better. At work, colleagues kept their distance, meetings grew colder, and phone calls went unanswered. A senior partner cornered him in the hallway, voice hushed but cutting. "Your family's name is in the paper for all the wrong reasons, Michael. This reflects on us." By the end of the week, his caseload had been stripped down to scraps, a message clearer than words: he was expendable. At home, the silence between husband and wife thickened. Michael no longer defended Vanessa, no longer filled the gaps she left. The humiliation seeped into every room, until even the walls seemed to echo with it. Across town, Elaine lived in a different rhythm, her mailbox filled not with shame but with envelopes. Letters from nurses she had mentored, families she had once cared for, even strangers who admired her dignity. The scent of ink and paper hung in the air as she sorted through them at her kitchen table. One card read, "Your strength reminds us all that dignity cannot be bought." Another bore only two words, underlined, "Well done." Ruth burst through the door one morning, newspaper tucked under her arm, her scarf slightly askew from hurrying. She slapped the paper onto the table, the bold headline facing upward. "Still the top story," she said with a grin that made her eyes sparkle. Elaine glanced down, then reached for her teacup. She sipped slowly, the steam curling under her nose. "Let them talk," she murmured. "I don't have to." Ruth laughed, plopping into a chair. "No, but I'll talk enough for both of us." The kitchen door creaked, and Abby, Elaine's 15-year-old granddaughter, slipped inside. Her backpack sagged against her shoulder, and her eyes carried the shame her mother had ignored. She crossed the room quickly and wrapped her arms around Elaine's waist. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "Everyone at school saw the article. They make fun of Mom." Elaine stroked her granddaughter's hair, breathing in the faint scent of shampoo and adolescent worry. "You have nothing to apologize for, Abby. What your mother did is hers to carry, not yours." Abby's grip tightened before she pulled away, her face a mixture of love and embarrassment. Elaine kissed her forehead, steady and calm, grounding her in a way Vanessa never had. As evening fell, Elaine settled back into her armchair, the house quiet except for the rhythmic tick of the mantel clock. She believed the worst was behind her, that the scandal had already burned through its kindling. But then the phone rang. Daniel's voice came through, crisp but laced with an unusual energy. "Elaine, the Charleston Children's Hospital is hosting its annual gala. They've invited you to speak. They want you to announce your trust donation publicly." Elaine set her teacup down carefully, her heart stirring. This wasn't just about disinheritance anymore. Her legacy was about to step into the spotlight, before the very city that had watched Vanessa fall. The ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering light across polished marble floors. Waiters in white jackets floated between tables, trays clinking softly with glasses of champagne. Charleston's finest filled the room. Politicians, philanthropists, business leaders all murmuring in anticipation of the evening's program. The air carried the faint scent of roses from elaborate centerpieces, and the buttery warmth of hors d'oeuvres passed from silver platters. Elaine Porter stood near the edge of the crowd, her simple navy dress a quiet contrast to the glittering gowns around her. Her flats, polished but still humble, pressed firmly against the floor. Ruth hovered at her side, draped in a crimson shawl that made her look like she'd planned the gala herself. "You nervous?" Ruth asked, her voice light, though her eyes searched Elaine's face. Elaine shook her head slowly. "Not nervous. Ready." Moments later, the program began. A spotlight swept across the stage as the hospital director took the podium, speaking warmly of generosity, community, and legacy. Then his voice lifted above the polite applause. "Tonight we honor Elaine Porter, whose estate trust will provide scholarships for future nurses and critical support for the Children's Hospital." Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned, eyes widening at the revelation. Elaine stepped forward, the applause building as she crossed the ballroom floor. Each step was deliberate, her old shoes carrying her farther than Vanessa's designer heels ever had. When she reached the podium, the applause swelled into a roar. Elaine paused, letting the sound wash over her, not as vanity but as vindication. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, resonant. "My life was built on hard work, double shifts at the hospital, nights of stretching pennies, mornings of walking into work with tired feet. I did it because I believed in care, in dignity, in leaving behind something better than I found. This trust is not an inheritance for one person. It is a legacy for many. And to those who mocked me," she let the words hang, her gaze piercing but calm, "you taught me that laughter fades, but legacy endures." The audience rose to their feet. The applause thundered, echoing against the marble and glass, a sound that filled Elaine's chest with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Outside the ballroom doors, another scene unfolded. Vanessa stood just beyond the velvet ropes, barred from entry, her heels sinking slightly into the brick path. The muffled roar of applause reached her ears, each clap a sting she couldn't silence. She tried peering through the glass, but the reflection staring back was her own, a woman excluded, forgotten, irrelevant. Back inside, Ruth leaned close to Elaine as she returned to her seat. Her smile was wicked but proud. "Now that's a walk worth taking." Elaine exhaled, her lips curving into a triumphant smile. She had walked through years of quiet endurance, of humiliation, of restraint, and tonight every step had led to this moment. Then the hospital director returned to the microphone, gesturing toward a velvet curtain at the side of the stage. And now, he announced, we are proud to unveil the permanent plaque that will carry Elaine Porter's name for generations. The curtain began to rise, and the room held its breath. The mornings in Elaine's house had changed. Gone were the restless nights where humiliation replayed itself in her mind. Now the dawn drifted in, gently spilling golden light across the oak floors. She brewed her tea slowly, the kettle's whistle a soft companion, and sat at the kitchen table where the only sound was the tick of the mantel clock. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel empty, it felt earned. On most days, Ruth would arrive unannounced, her scarf trailing behind her like a flag in the breeze. She'd plop herself into Elaine's armchair with the familiarity of someone who needed no invitation. The two women shared peaches in summer, cornbread in the fall, and long conversations that stretched easily into the afternoon. Ruth would gossip about neighbors, but more often she'd simply enjoy the silence with Elaine, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Meanwhile, across Charleston, Vanessa lived in a different kind of quiet, one that gnawed. Her social circle thinned overnight. Friends stopped answering her calls. Boutiques that once welcomed her with champagne now looked past her. The clatter of heels on tile no longer drew admiration, only whispers. Alone in her house, she scrolled through photos of her past life, dinners, dresses, the smug grin she once wore, and each image cut her deeper. Michael stayed quiet too, but for different reasons. He called Elaine sometimes, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. The conversations were brief, updates about Abby, weather, small talk, but always left wide spaces unsaid. He didn't defend Vanessa anymore, yet he couldn't quite condemn her either. His silence was its own punishment, heavy with shame. One evening, Ruth and Elaine sat on the porch as cicadas buzzed in the humid air. The sunset painted the sky with streaks of coral and violet. Elaine sipped her tea, watching the light fade, her flats resting comfortably on the wooden boards. I chose dignity over drama, she said at last, her voice low but certain. Ruth turned her head, eyes glinting in the dimming light. She nodded slowly. And dignity always lasts longer. Shoes wear thin, gossip dies out, but dignity, she tapped her temple with one finger, that stays remembered. Elaine smiled faintly, letting the words settle between them. The porch creaked softly as they rocked in their chairs, the world outside carrying on as though it had always been this calm. Yet even in her peace, Elaine felt a stirring inside her, not of vengeance but of purpose. She had spent decades as a nurse, years shaping her family's world, and now she sensed the next step waiting. The quiet she found wasn't meant only for rest. It was space to begin something new. Later that night, she pulled her notebook from the cedar chest, its pages waiting. She wrote in neat, deliberate letters, contact the nursing school, offer mentorship for students. Her pen lifted and she looked at the words. A new chapter was waiting, one that had nothing to do with Vanessa or Michael, but everything to do with what Elaine wanted to leave behind. The lecture hall smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, a mix Elaine knew well. Rows of nursing students leaned forward in their seats, notebooks open, pens poised. Elaine stood at the podium, not in scrubs anymore but in her simple navy dress, her flats soft with wear. She cleared her throat, her voice steady but warm. I spent 40 years as a nurse, she began, her gaze sweeping the room. I learned that medicine heals bodies, but dignity heals souls. You'll work long nights, you'll ache in your feet, but if you carry yourself with care, you'll leave a mark no paycheck can measure. The students scribbled furiously, nodding. One young woman raised her hand. Mrs. Porter, what made you set up this scholarship? Elaine paused, her hands resting on the edge of the podium. The truth was layered, but she gave them the heart of it, because I wanted my life's work to keep walking, even after I couldn't. Later that afternoon, the hospital lobby filled with staff, donors and patients' families for the unveiling of the scholarship plaque. The marble floors gleamed, the scent of fresh flowers, drifting from bouquets arranged around the stage. Elaine stood beside the curtain, Ruth at her side, her crimson scarf brighter than the roses. The hospital director stepped forward, microphone in hand. Today we celebrate the establishment of the Elaine Porter Nursing Scholarship, a gift that will shape generations of caregivers. Her legacy will live not only in this hospital, but in every patient touched by those she helps. The curtain fell away, revealing her name etched in bronze. Elaine Porter Nursing Scholarship Fund. Applause erupted, rising like a tide. Elaine blinked against the sting in her eyes, her heart swelling with something deeper than victory. Peace. Ruth reached for her hand, squeezing it tight. Now that's a name no one can laugh at, she whispered. Elaine smiled, the sound of the applause surrounding her. She didn't need to glance outside to know Vanessa wasn't there. The city had already erased her, whispers of scandal fading into silence. There was no inheritance for her to claim, no stage for her to stand on. Elaine leaned toward Ruth and spoke softly. Words meant more for herself than anyone else. Legacy is better than inheritance. The students clapped, the staff cheered, and the plaque gleamed in the light. Vanessa's laughter, once sharp and humiliating, was gone, replaced by something stronger, carved into bronze, carried in applause, and secured in the lives of those who would benefit from it. Elaine lifted her chin, letting the moment settle into her bones. My daughter-in-law laughed at my shoes, so I walked her straight out of their fortune.